From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Noory. Welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, Dr. Judy Wood joins us as she talks about directed energy technology. Where did the towers go? Stand by for that, but here's what's happening. Well, bit by bit, new details about the raid that killed the world's most wanted terrorist trickled out Tuesday. Unexpectedly high temperatures caused a lumbering helicopter carrying elite commandos to make a hard landing. A woman killed in the raid is believed to have been the wife of a courier whose trail led to Osama bin Laden. And as Navy SEALs swept through the massive compound, they handcuffed those that they encountered with plastic zip ties and pressed on to pursue their target, codenamed Geronimo. Then, once bin Laden had been shot, they doubled back to move the prisoners away from the compound before blowing up the downed helicopter. The fuller picture of the high-stakes assault emerged as U.S. officials weighed whether to release secret video and photos of bin Laden killed with a precise shot above the left eye. Doug Hagman, who's been monitoring this entire story for us. Doug, I'm told that they may release a photo. It's pretty gruesome. What do you hear?
Two different stories. One story that was echoed by Representative King of New York today, saying that his understanding of the photograph was it was not so gory and gruesome, totally inconsistent with the information that was recently released, that there was a gaping wound to the front of the forehead. So there's currently different stories right now with respect to the photographic documentation that could be released.
And the Taliban now, they're casting suspicion, Doug, on the announcement of bin Laden's death, saying that they won't believe it until they have seen proof or received confirmation from their sources close to him.
Well, indeed, and I have to say that it's interesting because we're monitoring the Arabic language side of this as well, and there is a lot of information on the by individuals who are known reliable posters saying that they don't believe that this occurred in the manner in which we are stating it occurred. And in fact, they believe that Osama bin Laden was not present at that compound. Whether or not, of course, that is true, it doesn't matter to what we believe. It's what they believe, and that's the important thing we have to remember.
Okay, Doug, thanks. Doug's website, part of coasttocoastam.com. Our poll, we've got 15,000 of you who've already voted on our Insta poll, which simply says, should Osama bin Laden's body have been buried at sea? You can go and see the results right now. But 42% of you, 42% say the body was not bin Laden and that the burial at sea is part of a cover-up. 42%. As a matter of fact, I was on WGN television this morning in Chicago talking about this poll, and pretty astounding numbers. Several states have started reassessing their medical marijuana laws after stern warnings from the federal government that everyone from licensed growers to regulators could be subjected to prosecution. The letters from U.S. attorneys in recent weeks have directly injected the federal government back into the debate that has for years been progressing at the state level. Warnings in Washington state, for example, to veto a proposal that would have created licensed marijuana dispensaries. Chris Conrad is a court-qualified expert witness on cannabis and a curator of the Hash Marijuana Hemp Museum in Amsterdam. He's on the line with us right now. Chris, let me ask you, this story is incredible, where it looks like the federal government is beginning to flex its muscles. States seem to be backing down.
Yeah, this is a constitutional crisis in effect, at least, because since the founding of the United States, the states have had sovereignty to write their own laws. And last year, the Supreme Court acknowledged this when it refused to hear the San Diego versus California case here. So then for the feds to start making these threats against patients and providers is nothing new, but to go after state healthcare workers, that is a new level of intimidation.
It sure is. In your opinion, Chris, what's going to happen to this railroad of trying to get marijuana legalized in many states? Is it going to stop?
Actually, I'm hoping that this will be seen as a challenge to the states to make Obama do the right thing, demand that the federal government live up to the promise of the Ogden memo of recognizing states' medical marijuana laws, and to try to get the DEA to reschedule medical marijuana, or maybe even this could be something that could help jumpstart the drive to get marijuana out of the drug schedule and treat it more like alcohol, which I think is more appropriate anyway.
All right, very good. Thank you, Chris. Sony CEO Howard Stringer faced harsh criticism of his leadership after the consumer electronics conglomerate revealed hackers may have stolen the data of another 25 million accounts. This is on top of the 77 million in a second massive security breach. A Southern California family returning home after church found their 6-year-old dog covered with bee stings, convulsing in the backyard. The 40-pound dog named Inu died minutes later near the hive under the eave of the family's home. He had been attacked by 25,000 bees. Sherry sent me this email today of a great story, and I want to read it to you. Listen to this. Back in September of 2005, on the first day of school, Martha Cothran, a Social Security school teacher at the Robinson High School in Little Rock, did something not to be forgotten. On the first day of school, with the permission of the school superintendent, the principal, and the building supervisor, she removed all the desks out of the classroom. When the first period kids entered the room, they discovered that there were no desks. Miss Cothran, where are our desks? The kids asked. She replied, you can't have a desk until you tell me how you earn the right to sit at a desk. Well, they thought, maybe it's our grades, they said. No, she said. Well, maybe it's our behavior. She told them, no, it's not even your behavior. And so they came and went the first period, second period, third period, still no desks in the classroom. By early afternoon, television news crews had started gathering there in her classroom to report about this crazy teacher who had taken all the desks out of her room. The final period of the day came, and as the puzzled students found seats on the floor of the deskless classroom, Martha Cothran said, throughout the day, no one has been able to tell me just what he or she has done to earn the right to sit at the desks that are ordinarily found in the classroom. Now I'm going to tell you. And at this point, she went over to the door of her classroom and opened it. 27 U.S. veterans, all in uniforms, walked into that classroom, each one carrying a school desk. The vets began placing the school desks in rows, and then they would walk over and stand alongside the wall. Well, by the time the last soldier had set the final desk in place, those kids started to understand, perhaps for the very first time in their lives, just how the right to sit at those desks had been earned. The teacher said, you didn't earn the right to sit at those desks. These heroes did it for you. They placed the desks here for you. Now it's up to you to sit in them. It's your responsibility to learn, to be good students, to be good citizens. They paid the price so that you could have the freedom to get an education. And don't ever forget it. That, by the way, is a true story. Up next, Howard Bloom joins us. He's going to react to our Insta poll. And also, we're going to be talking about why so many people just don't trust government. Howard is next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. Howard Bloom, founder of the International Paleopsychology Project, of course, and is a regular contributor here at Coast to Coast AM. A number of books out there, Global Brain, The Lucifer Principle, and The Genius of the Beast. And here he is back on Coast to Coast AM. Howard, welcome back.
George, it's good to see you. That's an amazing poll.
It really is. And I wanted to get your reaction to that, first of all, before we also get into why so many people just don't trust the government story anymore, regardless of what it seems to be. But here we are with about 43% of the listeners who participated in the Insta poll, well over 15,000 total people so far, simply saying they don't believe this story. They don't believe this has been lauded. That's a pretty high number, Howard.
It is an extremely high number, but in a sense, it's not as high as you would think. Remember, we're more or less evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans, and we've been that way for a long time. And when two groups go up against each other, they slime the other to the nth degree. And that has been going on in American politics since the election of 1800, when Thomas Jefferson had secret material written, which he then spread to the public, calling John Adams. Remember John Adams, one of the most colorless presidents of all time, but a man to whom we owe our republic. Jefferson, who we also admire, I admire him tremendously, slimed him with the idea that he was a hermaphrodite. You know what that is? I mean,
yeah.
yeah, that he had sexual organs of both sexes. That's ridiculous. But those are the depths to which we stoop, and we've been stooping to those depths for 200 years now. And right now, the current alternative narrative is that because there's a Democrat in office, he's got to be absolutely illegitimate. He doesn't come from the United States. He's not constitutionally an American and entitled to run for the office or be in the White House. He is a secret Muslim. He's a plant from the Islamic world. All of these crazy ideas, but they're no crazier than the ideas that, for example, were promoted by, what was his name again? Johnson, when he was trying to slime Goldwater. Remember, Johnson came out with this. Goldwater wanted to give nuclear weapons to troops, and that's a pretty bold and scary move. But Johnson took that and turned it into he turned Goldwater into a monster.
Yeah, he destroyed him with that.
Yes, he absolutely destroyed him, and he leaked all kinds of false stories. Well, dirty politics are not nice, and I dislike them personally tremendously. And the ideal is that we have a civic culture, and in a civic culture, we should be able to talk to each other civilly, with a great deal of respect for the fact that we all reflect to a certain extent the same values, and that our passion comes from our commitment to the same values. But the fact is, we are not civic creatures, and we are not calm and rational. And in reality, there's a positive, and I hate to say this because I don't think it's positive to constantly be sliming other people, but there is a positive aspect to this, because in other countries, including countries today, people do not contend with lies. People do not contend by libeling each other. People do not contend by slandering each other with bizarre stories of conspiracies. Instead, they contend with weaponry, and they have civil wars, and they have putsches, and they have government overthrows. And the results are not nice. And people live under terrible and violent conditions where, for example, in Africa, your arms are lopped off for political purposes to make a political statement. So we're lucky that this is the worst that we do, words and fantasies.
Well, Howard, my head tells me we got bin Laden. Our great Navy SEALs did what they had to do, mission accomplished. But there's a part of me that says maybe we didn't. What took them so long to get him? What, why is this going on now? Maybe he died a long time ago. Why did they bury him at sea so quickly? Where's the proof? They still haven't released anything yet. They're debating whether to do it.
And I strongly suspect that they should not release a photo. I think that now Obama made a statement last week about leading from behind, and that statement was snapped up immediately and used against him. But this is one instance where leading from behind is a tremendous advantage. If we are to put out a picture, one of the reports, as you just pointed out in your own broadcast, the facts are still trickling in. We don't know all of them. But one of the reports says that this man was shot through the center of the head and part of his skull was blown off.
Yeah.
Now, if you saw a picture of that and you were a Muslim, you would be so furious for good reason. It would be ridiculous. And it would bring out the worst in you, absolutely the worst in you. And frankly, you and I, if we were in that position, would not be able to help it. We would be infuriated. So releasing a picture is the worst thing that we can do. Burying him at sea so there is no body is the best thing we should do. One thing we have to learn from the Arab street revolts, which you and I have talked about, is that when you have a body and you can have a funeral, you have a casus belli, you have a trigger with which you can bring people pouring into the streets. Martyrdom does something remarkable to people's gut instincts, and it fuses them together in anger against whatever group has done this to us. And if we were to rouse that kind of sentiment with this killing, which was a necessary killing, we had to get rid of this man, unfortunately. But if we were to rouse that kind of anger in the Islamic community, it would be devastating for us. It would mean that al-Qaeda would win. It would mean that al-Qaeda would grow in strength. It would mean that the ideas that Osama bin Laden stood for, the ideas of violence and terrorism and killing men, women, and children, but especially women and children, those ideas, we would simply be driving them further home. So Obama's instinct, which seems to be to always stay in the rear, allow other people to take the lead, allow other people to look as if they are doing the leading, when in fact you are leading from behind. His reticence, his degree of composure, which can sometimes be a great disadvantage when we don't see his emotion. Right now, it is leading him in the right direction. Please do not show us those photos.
But could this backfire, Howard? And by that I mean, can the Taliban and those militants simply say, he's not dead, don't worry, and let that fester through the young
I mean, look what happened. There was a national hero once upon a time. The Rome or England had lived under British control or it was the other way around. Sorry, Britain had lived under the control of the Roman Empire for a long time. Then the Roman Empire began to crumble, and when it crumbled, the Romanized Britons were left all on their own against the barbarians, and they weren't able to handle themselves. The barbarians were far stronger than they were. They were used to civic peace. They weren't used to making war for a living, which is what the barbarians did. And a national hero arose to defend them. And they needed that national hero so badly that when he died, they would not believe in his death, and they believed he would come back. And his name was King Arthur. Well, this is how legends are made, and it's a part of the mythic process that's built into our bones, that's built into our blood. So when you take out the hero of another group, you know you're in for trouble. But you also know something else, that war is a difficult matter, and in war, it's the group that is willing to endure and persist the longest that wins. And sometimes in a battle, by killing somebody you need to kill, and I hate the fact that we have to kill anybody, George, anybody at all, even Osama bin Laden. But when you take out a member of the other group, you know that you can rouse a fury that is going to come at you like a tidal wave. And you have to be prepared to live through that fury and come out on the other side and to last longer than your opponent.
Government mistrust. Why don't people believe in government? Well, and when I say that, and I'm saying most of the people, there are some people that do, obviously.
Well, you know this better than I do because you host some of the leading conspiracy theorists from time to time. Mm-hmm. But why in the world do we fight for freedom of speech? Why in the world do people like you and me fight for freedom of speech? I think we've both fought for freedom of speech in our time. We do it so that alternative narratives can flourish. We do it so that we can look at things with a critical eye. We do it so that we can entertain our fantasies and then try to root them in reality and see if they fit the facts. And that's how humans learn things. And societies learn things by having many people with many different points of view who test those points of view. And some points of view turn out to be accurate in the end, and some points of view turn out not to be accurate in the end. But without that testing, a society is dead in the water. A society is brain dead. And one of the reasons democracy is winning right now, to the extent that democracy is the word on the mouths of the people in the street revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia and even Syria, is that in a democracy, our ability to contest things and criticize things and present alternative interpretations of things makes us as a society smarter.
So you think that in terms of belief in government and not, that it's probably healthy?
It is very healthy for us to distrust the government as long as we trust it enough to do the things that are necessary to execute, to make our society run. We are willing to go to work every day. We are willing to be productive. We are willing, and we are very willing to do this. We are willing to give to each other. We are willing to care about each other. We are willing to uplift the fallen, as we did in New Orleans, as we're doing right now in the South. When other people are up against an adversity, the rest of us rush in to help them. As long as we manage to maintain our civic virtues and do the things that allow a society, the kind that you and I believe in, a society of freedom of speech, freedom of belief, and respect for each other, as long as we're able to do the necessary things, a certain element of disbelief, even as an entertainment, is a valuable thing.
And Howard, let's take some phone calls when we come back. What's new with you these days? What projects are you working on?
Oh, I'm working on my next book, The Genius of the Beast. The current book is doing well. The Genius of the Beast. There's a racehorse in in Dubai. There is a racehorse in Dubai named the Beast. He's named after the genius of the beast because the chief counselor to the sheikh who runs Dubai got hold of the Genius of the Beast, read it, got up in front of the Arab Business and Economic Forum, told them, you must read this book to understand the future of the Arab business world. It tells the future of Dubai. As a consequence, I have given it to my sheikh to read. That sheikh, by the way, is also Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. And the guy who is the chief counselor is also the former Minister of Development. And he also runs a company called Emma Realty, which is a $33 billion company.
Well, that's going to be exciting. Howard, hold on. We're going to come back with you in a moment. Well, you can be a Coast Insider for less than 25 cents a day by simply going to coasttocoastam.com. Next Tuesday, by the way, when I'm back in Los Angeles, we'll do our video chat for you insiders. You get to see me. I won't be able to see you, but we'll be doing that when I'm in L.A. all the time, the first Tuesday of every month. When we come back, we'll take your phone calls with Howard Bloom right here on Coast to Coast AM. So there's a horse running around Dubai, huh?
There's horses running around apparently on racetracks all over the world. I sent an email to Mohammed Alabar, the person we were just talking about, the person who is the chief counselor to the sheikh who runs Dubai, saying if you ever get to New York, please let me know, and we'll get together to brainstorm, because I would love to brainstorm with this man. And I got an email back saying, your email made Mr. Alabar's day. He wants you to know that he's named a racehorse after your book, The Genius of the Beast. But here's the irony, George. I am a Jewish atheist Zionist, and there is a horse running around in the Arab world with my name or the name of my book on it. And then I got an email or a message on Facebook from my dearest fan is in Pakistan. I love him dearly. He gives me enormous energy. And he is a trainer to the Pakistani cricket team. So he is a trainer to the leading stars in Pakistan, the guys who are our equivalent or their equivalent to our NBA stars. And he said, look, there's a new issue of Vanity Fair out, and it's got an article on Warren Buffett. And if I'm not mistaken, the picture of Warren Buffett at his desk has two books on his desk, and one of those books is The Genius of the Beast.
That's great.
So we bought a copy.
Good for you.
And sure enough, there's The Genius of the Beast on Warren Buffett's desk. So those are the adventures, at least, of The Genius of the Beast in the last couple of months.
And by the way, you may be an atheist, but I almost had you converted sometime.
Now, you almost have me converted, and the name of the book I am working on now, which won't be out for another year and a half or something like that, the spring, I think, of whatever year is coming up, 2012, it is the God problem, George. So you and I will have something to talk about when I finish writing this book.
Perfect. Let's go to the phones. We'll go to Don, truck driving in Arizona, and he's on Coast to Coast. Hi, Don. Go ahead. You're on with Howard Bloom.
Thank you, George, for taking my call.
Sure.
Two questions for Howard. Number one, now that the bin Laden has been taken, do you think that the sleeper cells here in the States are going to be awoken? And the second question is, do you think that we're going to go after the new number one over there?
These are great questions. I'm not aware of sleeper cells in the United States, although I've heard about them for a long time. The word is from from Pakistan, as of earlier today, that Al-Qaeda has set aside all of its previous priorities, and it has now made Pakistan the number one enemy. Now, that's the Taliban in Pakistan. It's made Pakistan the number one enemy, but Al-Qaeda, and number two is the international community, meaning the West. I think we can expect to see increased activity in the West, but with events like the underwear bomber, it's become clear that, or it seems to me, as if Al-Qaeda does not have sleeper cells in the United States. I could be dead wrong about that.
I think they do, Howard. And Zawahiri, who was number two, I'm sure has now been elevated to number one. And I don't think he's too far from where bin Laden was hiding out.
Well, the speculation from, in this case, from Hong Kong, from somebody who's been doing a number of books on Al-Qaeda and seems to have close connections to Al-Qaeda operatives, he believes that al-Zawahiri is the person who's been puppeteering Osama bin Laden, and that because Zawahiri doesn't have charm, because al-Zawahiri doesn't have social magnetism and charisma, al-Zawahiri put bin Laden, a tall man with a grave composure and a face of kindness of all things.
And money.
And has put him up front because he was good for money raising. But al-Zawahiri, according to this article, which is in the Asia Times today, is the man who's been running things all along. So he may need another puppet. And in fact, the speculation from that source, from the Asia Times, is that in reality, al-Zawahiri has been re-engineering al-Qaeda for the last 10 years so that he could bring a new group of leaders in, and he's got a younger group of leaders now, and take the older group of leaders and send them back to the Middle East to lead the Arab street revolts. Now, this is not me speaking. This is one of the writers for Asia Times, who, as I said, is an expert on al-Qaeda.
I want your opinion on this. I got an email a couple days ago, Monday morning, after I was on Sunday night, when the president came out and made the announcement about bin Laden. And the email was, how in the world could you compare Jesus Christ to Osama bin Laden? Are you insane? This is what I said Sunday night, and you tell me about the statement.
Go ahead.
What I said was, just as Christ was crucified and it didn't end Christianity, if anything, it magnified it, the death of bin Laden will not stop terrorism.
Well,
that's what I said.
It's brilliant, George. I mean, I hate to say something so extremely positive, but it's fucking, sorry. Wait, got to get hold of my language. It's brilliant. It really is brilliant. And the fact is that the influence of a person can live on far, far, far beyond his lifetime. And Osama bin Laden, we've discussed this before, but Osama bin Laden was one of those potent idealists of our entire time. I've spent a good deal of my time over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. I started writing about bin Laden in the 1990s. And I have spent that time trying to feel my way into bin Laden's body so I could feel my way into his mind, because you were told by Sun Tzu, in order to defeat the enemy, be able to walk in the enemy's shoes. And what I've discovered, reading everything that bin Laden has ever put out, this guy was an amazing, committed idealist. And people like that who gain the kind of publicity that bin Laden has gotten, they do not tend to die, and that's why it was so wise not to give us photos. That's why it was so wise to take the body and put it underwater where no one can find it as quickly as possible.
Well, in making the assumption they did get him, then government knows they got him. They probably are saying, who cares what other people say? Let's go to first-time caller Ernest in Washington, D.C. Go ahead, Ernest.
Hello, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure, thanks.
I just wanted to say to your guest that I'm not buying the Osama story, and these are the reasons why.
Okay.
Many officials in the past have said that he was been dead for years. Another reason is that when they buried him, they claimed that was keeping the Islamic tradition, but you come to find out hours later that was a violation of Islamic tradition. There's another reason why I'm not believing it, and that's because Pakistan has blockaded America's supplies for the past week, and America has not been able to get supplies into Afghanistan. So I believe that America decided to end the charade and to come up out of Pakistan or even start a war with Pakistan because of the blockade.
All right, let's get your point on this, Howard. And let me ask you this. To me, there's no way Pakistani intelligence didn't know that Osama bin Laden was in that brand new $1 million house.
Brand new $1 million house in an extremely expensive neighborhood where the erection of any new house would cause an awful lot of talk, and in a neighborhood right next to their West Point, where they have got to check out the security of everybody who moves into that neighborhood in order to maintain their own security. So, yes, it is very hard to believe that they didn't know that he was there. But there's another story, and again, this is from the Asian press, and it's that the Pakistanis were led in on this raid. There was a raid on January 25th in, of all places, Abbottabad, the very, very same town. It's a city of 100,000. Mm-hmm. And that raid was conducted in order to get the Bali bomber, the guy who bombed a resort in Bali and killed 200 people several years ago. Well, that operation took place successfully on the 25th, and it was carried out by the Pakistani military with the Pakistani intelligence service, the ISI. Now, when America, according to this story, when America went to the Pakistanis and said, we're going after another spot in Abbottabad, and we want to use the helicopter base that you've allowed us to use in Pakistan in order to get there, the Pakistanis assumed that this was a mop-up operation, that they were going in to get the associates of the Bali bomber. not that they were going in to get Osama bin Laden. So according to this story, the Pakistanis were in on it, but they didn't have a clue as to who the target was. And according to other stories, the SEALs, until the last minute, didn't have an idea of who they were going after.
Why hasn't the funding source of bin Laden why wasn't it dried up? Why wasn't it seized?
Because what bin Laden stands for is something that is believed in by many, many very wealthy people in Saudi Arabia. And why do they believe in it? Because of a deal made 200 years ago with an Islamic fundamentalist group, the Wahhabis, with Wahhab, the guy who started Wahhabism. And children in Saudi Arabia are brought up in the religion of jihad. They are brought up with the idea that any unbeliever is unclean. And that the world will not be complete until the entire world is liberated to the truth and justice of Islam. Now, if you believe that, remember, idealism is something that you have, I have, we all have it. And you, as an idealist, would want to give your money to the one guy who is doing the most to bring the truth, justice, and light of the only true God to the rest of the world. And you might well choose as that instrument Osama bin Laden, who was pure in his idealism.
Let's go to Kevin, St. Paul, Minnesota. There you go. Hi, Kev.
Hey, hi, guys. This regards the question of whether people trust government or not. And let me just start off by just correcting a little something that Howard said. We're not actually split between Democrats and Republicans. Just a day or two ago, as a matter of fact, there was a poll that came out from Rasmussen, I believe, and it indicates that both Democrats and Republicans comprise just a little under 1/3 of the population.
Amazing.
So there's a sizable group of people, maybe even a slight bit more than a third, that are neither party. So I don't think you can write off this distrust in government to simply political partisanship. Now, I'll agree that the Coast audience probably is more skeptical than, your average guy on the street. So maybe that might be an aspect of it. But nonetheless, I think it's extraordinarily dangerous to allow the government ever to decide what we are capable of taking or what is too gruesome for us to see or not too gruesome. I mean, for goodness sakes, we saw our own president's head get blown off on television, repeatedly over the last 40 years. We've seen that image. So I think we can handle this. And a big part of our freedom is that not that the government is allowed to tell us or not tell us something, but that we have the choice to either look at it or not. We don't have to. Nobody's saying that if they put up a picture of a gruesome guy with a part of his head blown off, that everybody's got to go look at it. They have a choice. That's our freedom. But it's never tolerable to allow the government to make that decision for us. If we can't trust the government, which we don't, I think, in large measure, and if we can't believe that we're being given at least the access to the total truth, then we are in deep trouble. And frankly, I think we are in deep trouble.
Mr. Bloom, he's got some points.
I think that is an extremely good point. Kevin, when the WikiLeaks first broke, I had to do a number of interviews about it, and the difficulty was I couldn't make up my mind about it. I didn't know how I felt. Sometimes it takes a month or two for your feelings to really come to the surface. And after 2 months of watching the way that the WikiLeaks material was used, I realized it was one of the best things that ever happened to us. Truths were being told to us that had been suppressed for a long time and that we needed as citizens to know in order to make judicious decisions, in order to make appropriate choices about things. So, I mean, the fact that the person who is responsible for the WikiLeaks is in jail under bizarre conditions is really abhorrent and goes against everything that America stands for, Bradley Manning. So your point is one of those points I have to think about, but it strikes me as being correct because you're right. We can't trust the government to withhold facts from us and be a nanny government or a daddy government. Ultimately, the daddy and the nanny is us.
I want you to interview me for your new book on God, by the way.
Are you interviewing for the job of God?
No. Far from that.
Oh, well, we'll interview you for the Archangel George.
I'd be lucky to invited to sit at the table with them, believe me. Let's go to Scott in Columbus, Ohio, east of the Rockies. Hey, Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, George.
Sure.
I was just wanted to point out another big thing that happened on that day. You guys are talking about Obama being the martyr. We had another saint, actually, that was, I guess you could say, in a way, martyred that same day. I don't see any coincidence there. And I wanted to ask, what do you think about the grandchildren that were killed in Libya? And is there do you think, any effort underway by the administration to kind of cover that up? Thanks a lot, George.
Okay. And I guess he's talking about Gaddafi's.
Right. Well, step one is that you don't know what's true with Gaddafi and what is not. Talk about distrust of authorities. Gaddafi is really an authority to distrust. And he seems to come up with convenient kids whenever his compound is attacked. Remember, when President Reagan had his compound attacked, he came up with a stepdaughter nobody seemed to have ever heard of before, who was killed in the attack. So it's and I understand there are pictures of this son, but pictures of pictures, you can get them from anywhere. So there is a little bit of a reason to doubt that this happened. And if it did happen, that is, if a son and 3 grandchildren were killed, I think would be deplorable. I mean, in fact, as a human, I deplore the fact that we had to kill Osama. Having to kill somebody in order to accomplish a goal is deplorable. I mean, that's the way the world works, and we're not given much of a choice about it sometimes. But no, in the best of all possible worlds, killing anyone for any reason whatsoever, aside from immediate self-defense, is unacceptable.
Do you accept the official story of 9/11, Howard, or do you think there's something else to it?
I absolutely accept the official story. I mean, I watched it from my rooftop. Yesterday I saw a picture of it for the first time in years. It nearly broke me up. It was a very difficult thing to watch. It was a very difficult thing to hear the sirens of, again, we talk about as long as people care about each other, we have the signatures to make this country work. It was very difficult to stand on my rooftop in Brooklyn looking at the World Trade Center and hear the sirens screaming down the streets from all of the fire companies around Brooklyn. It was the only time in my life.
Well, but I'm not asking you that. I mean, we know those horrible things.
Right, but I do accept the existing story. I do not think that it was a government plot on the left. On the left, the story was that it was a government plot set up by Bush to put us all under a military rule.
No, I don't think it was that. But what about the possibility that those groups outside of the country who are trying to bring us down to our knees, economically and otherwise, may have been involved with bin Laden and his cronies to do what they did? I could accept that.
The Iranians believe that the government set up 9/11, and it also set up Osama. And Osama is a Hollywood fiction set up by Washington in order to justify invading Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and, quote, the oil-rich states of the Middle East. That's according to a story today on the Osama killing. Now, do I believe that? I've been on Iranian TV going up against that. I've been horrified by it. But, George, we never know the truth. The truth is always provisional.
And again, that leads us back to our poll and back to what we were talking about initially, and that is this incredible distrust. And I don't know when, Howard, it's going to be turned around, but I think it has to be. If this country is going to continue to advance, if we're going to move toward the future for the centuries ahead, for our children and their children and their children, we have got to change the way people perceive government and the way government treats people.
Well, I think you've made an extremely important point, and we have to change the way we perceive the future, and we have to change the way we perceive our children's children's future, and we have to know that that future is in our hands. And unless we look at the future resolutely and move toward it, we won't have that future.
That's Howard Bloom. And when we come right back, Dr. Judy Wood joins us with probably one of the most incredible stories I've heard in a while. But I want you to sit back and let me know later, what do you think? Well, probably one of the most comprehensive works I've ever read, Where Did the Towers Go? By Dr. Judy Wood, Ph.D. And we're going to be talking with Judy in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. Dr. Judy Wood, our special guest tonight. She came to us at the recommendation of our science advisor and editor of the EnterpriseMission.com, Richard C. Hoagland, who also picked up her book, Where Did the Towers Go?, and sent it off to former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. Dr. Judy Wood is a former professor of mechanical engineering. She has research expertise in experimental stress analysis, structural mechanics, deformation analysis, materials characterization, and materials engineering science. And all this in the time since 9/11. She has applied her expertise to a forensic study of more than 40,000 images, hundreds of video clips, and a large volume of witness testimony pertaining to the destruction of the World Trade Center complex. Tonight, here's Dr. Judy Wood, first time on Coast to Coast. Hi, Judy.
Hello.
Good to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Now, because I think you're just as important as the story we're going to talk about tonight because of your amazing work, tell us about you, Judy. Tell us about your background, why you got into the field that you got into, and how important that is to the work you've done here.
Well, I used to talking about the evidence, but I guess my background is part of the evidence.
It sure is.
My bachelor's degree is in civil engineering, structural engineering. My master's degree is in engineering mechanics, which is a type of applied physics. And my PhD is actually in the area of applied physics, but it's materials engineering science, which is an interdisciplinary degree involving several different departments, all at Virginia Tech. And nothing probably could have prepared me better or prepared anyone better for this particular task of evaluating the World Trade Center disaster.
Now,
all aspects of it.
There's no question. Now, you're also a former professor at Clemson. You're not there anymore. I've got to ask you this. Was it because, are you not there because of the controversy of your work, or what happened?
Well, doing this kind of work is not good, not healthy for anyone's career.
No, it's not.
We'll leave it at that.
I understand.
And it's especially, you're the target of all sorts of smear campaigns and whatnot. And even while I was still there, there's all sorts of emails to my colleagues, and it's just an overload that everyone gets with this stuff.
It was just too much for them to handle?
I can't speak I won't speak for others, but it's a challenging issue for anyone to stand up, and I think there's a reason why most people, well, no one else is standing up, because it's a career suicide.
All right, Judy, let's find out first and foremost how you got involved in this study, when you got involved in this research.
Well, on 9/11, the story didn't make sense to me. And when I saw these buildings appear to unravel like a sweater, buildings don't do that. And I looked at my colleagues. We were in the faculty conference room looking on the big screen television. I looked at them like, this is kind of a joke out of, War of the Worlds, except the video presentation of it. And they looked at me like I was nuts. And I quickly learned that you can't talk about certain things. Not allowed to question things out loud. But am I going crazy, or is the rest of the world? I'm objective. How would you know? And I started making some calculations about how long it would take the towers to go away and what I would anticipate. And no, something doesn't add up. But no one else seemed too bothered by it. And I tried to put it aside for a while and, do my work. But then it got to the point where I couldn't set it aside any longer, because whose job is it to say, hey, something here is not right? Do you just go along with the herd, or do you stop and speak out? And I remember the day I said that to my mother, and she said, well, if you speak out, you won't have a job anymore. And I said, if I don't, no one will. And I still feel that to be the case.
Well, you've got incredible expertise, Judy. You've got the kind of background that engineers need in order to talk about what you're going to be talking about with us tonight. We'll probably learn some things from you. Let's go back for a moment, and I do find it very strange in terms of timing. You're on with us at the point where Osama bin Laden apparently has been shot and killed, which occurred Sunday into Monday, and we'll get into that a little bit later on as well. I remember my daughter calling me on that day saying, "Dad, you've got to watch television," because I had just done my St. Louis late night talk show, and I was sleeping. And she woke me up, and I turned on the television set, and sure enough, saw the tragedy of the second plane hit one of the towers, and I couldn't believe it. And at that time, they were talking about some 30,000 people trapped in the building. Thank God there wasn't nearly that amount of people there. And I just sat there in awe, Judy. But the thing that I found strange for me, and this is from a broadcaster, not an engineer by any means, was the ease at how these buildings fell apart. You don't like to use the word collapse. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they just seemed to crumble. And then the other one crumbled. And then the World Trade Center Tower 7 crumbled, and was never hit. And all that to me was very bizarre. No question in my mind. I saw planes hit them. But I didn't understand how buildings like that could crumble so fast. And as we discuss this tonight, I want to make it perfectly clear of your deepest condolences as well as ours to the victims, the family members, and everybody involved in this horrible, horrible episode. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to try to get some additional answers to a story that just obviously doesn't seem to go away. It's been 10 years since the tragedy, almost, of 9/11. And at this point, when you talk to people, Judy, what do they say? I mean, do they take the official story? Are they a little suspect? What do you hear?
It matters on where they're coming from and how comfortable they feel speaking out. There's how I feel about these events is that there's an official story and there's always another story. That when the official one no longer works is a backup one. And neither one are the actual story. There's always another story if you look at events over time. But people tend to go along with whoever's around them. So if you get someone by themselves and they feel it's okay to voice their opinion and say, well, I don't think something's quite right, then they're open to listening to what you have to say.
All right, so the story is the planes hit the towers, they burned, the steel beams burned, and the weight of the building just toppled down on every floor, and down it came. As an engineer, give me your thoughts on that.
Well, the official story being about this pancaking down business, if you think of the timing, that's 110 stories. And the ground shook on the North Tower for 8 seconds. Think of these floors pancaking down, slapping together, boom, boom, boom. Clap your hands together for each floor pancaking down. Mm-hmm. How many times can you clap your hands in 8 seconds? Not 110 times.
No. No way.
So another way of thinking of it, turn the towers on their sides and have a runner running at world record pace. Well, he can't even keep up with the unraveling of the building. It's incredibly fast. And then where's it left? The biggest thing that hit me was, where did it go? Where'd the buildings go? There's nothing much left. There's a few beams here and there, a few columns, but it's pretty much at ground level.
What was it, pulverized?
It I call it dustified. And I have this unique vocabulary. I get a lot of grief for it, but it's actually more scientific than assigning a name of a known phenomena to an unknown characteristic that you come across. So, for example, smoke. Smoke is what you get from fires. If you don't know what this stuff is in the air, don't call it smoke. I just call it fumes because it's the generic term for something.
Sure.
Something hazy in the air. Well, for the buildings, we don't know. This is a new process we haven't seen before, so I call it dustification. The building turned to dust.
They both did, didn't they?
Not both. There was, let's see, building 1 turned to dust, 2, 7, 4, 3, most of 4, 3 in the middle of 6.
Now, what would turn something like that into dust?
That's a good question.
I mean, let's rule out a plane hitting the building should not turn the buildings into dust, correct?
Correct.
What about some kind of controlled demolition?
It doesn't turn the building to powder either.
They just collapse, right?
They turn to powder in midair. You could see images of a piece of steel flying through the air, melting like ice cream, trailing dust, and there's nothing. They hit the ground.
There was some residue of thermite found. What is it, and what does that mean?
Thermite is basically rust and aluminum powder. Well, the building was made out of steel, and if you turn it into dust in midair, that dust is going to rust by the time it hits the ground. The buildings were covered with aluminum cladding, and if you turn that into dust, you have dustified aluminum and dustified steel. So if you look at the dust that's around on the streets, if you don't have those components in it, you have something more seriously wrong. So it's something you would completely expect. But also, if you think about what thermite is, what does it do? It melts things. It has a tremendous amount of heat for a short period of time. The buildings didn't melt. They didn't burn up. They didn't crash down. They turned to powder in midair.
Yeah,
thermite can't do that.
Did anybody report any explosions or sounds like that?
Yes. Yeah, some things going boom. Bombs go boom, but not everything that goes boom is a bomb.
Right.
Think of an egg in your microwave oven. A raw egg in the shell.
Yeah.
It'll go boom.
It'll go boom.
But doesn't mean it has explosives in it. But if you turn a building to dust, at what time do you turn it to dust? Do you start weakening the material and it just starts coming apart? Well, you have water tanks in the building. You have air tanks, pressurized air. You have all sorts of other types of pressure vessels. And we do have eyewitnesses at ground level who witnessed Scott packs exploding. The air tanks that the firefighters wear to fight fires so they can breathe clean air
right.
were seen exploding, sitting on fire trucks.
Judy, as we get into this, and let me ask you this now from the outset: are you saying that the planes that hit the towers, the two main towers, and I'm still debating what might have hit the Pentagon? Are you saying though that the planes that hit the towers might have been just a diversion, just something for people to see?
Planes cannot turn buildings into powder in midair. And leave no, remains. So something else happened to the buildings.
In addition to the planes hitting them?
Well, planes cannot cause buildings to turn into powder in midair. And neither can bombs, and neither can, rule out a whole list of things. And even if you severed all of the columns in the building, like you do in controlled demolition,
right,
and slam the building down to the ground,
you're still going to have the parts, the pieces, right?
Exactly. And also it's going to make a boom when it hits the ground. It's going to make a thud.
A huge thud.
And there was not a significant seismic signal that would be consistent with that size of a building hitting the ground. That's another aspect of it.
Let's move over to Building 7 for just a moment, because I think that's a very important ingredient here to what we're talking about. This is a building that did not get hit by anything, yet it crumbled to the ground just like the other two major towers. Why? Structurally, Judy, why would it disintegrate like that?
Well,
if it wasn't hit by anything.
That's a good question. And its seismic signal was even stranger yet. It was essentially non-existent. In many of the seismic stations, there was no signal that was discernible out of background noise. There's a couple of the stations did record something, if just barely. It's just barely detectable. But it was 6 times the potential energy of the Seattle King Dome that was blown up. The Seattle King Dome made a 2.3 on the Richter scale. Building 7 made a 0.6 at the stations that could record it.
That's weird.
Okay. It didn't make a thud when it hit. People around it didn't hear it go thud, didn't see it go thud. It
was just gone, right?
Yeah. It just dropped out of sight, went poof. I use the term poof. Didn't collapse, it went poof. It went poof slightly differently than the others, but it still dematerialized, if you want to use that term, in a similar way.
You've talked about why it's important to consider the physical evidence and the science of 9/11. Why is that?
Because without it, you just have guesswork. You just have speculation. For example, Building 7, it looked like controlled demolition. Well, that doesn't mean it was. It's like physical evidence in a murder investigation. You can't say, well, I think that person shot that person because I just think they did. It looked like they did. But, well, there's no gun. Oh, there's no bullet holes in the body. Oh, when you prove something like that in court, I never really appreciated so much why they have to make a connection with every single detail, because otherwise you're just trying them on assumptions. And if you can see that there's no bullet holes in the body, how can you say this guy was shot to death with a gun? And so with the building collapsing, if it makes no seismic signal, how could it have collapsed?
Well, that's a good point. We're talking with Dr. Judy Wood, author of the work, Where Did the Towers Go? And we're going to get into her thoughts and theories on what might have happened to those facilities, those structures. Her website, drjudywood.com, by the way, drjudywood.com, and Where Did the Towers Go.com, all linked up at coasttocoastam.com. This is a very packed, extremely concise research book on Dr. Wood's thoughts on what she believes happened. I mean, I've never seen something so detailed in all my life. I mean, this book alone should have been delivered to the 9/11 Commission. We'll be back with more with Dr. Judy Wood in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Well, I know a lot of you are interested in this topic, and we'll take your calls with Dr. Judy Wood next hour. But we've got much more to talk with her about when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory with Dr. Judy Wood. Judy, of course, this entire episode has been extremely tragic, but one of the most tragic episodes while this was going on were the people who were jumping from the buildings. You have devoted a lot of time to the jumpers. Tell me why.
I feel that I can somewhat relate to them, that I felt that there's some of them that were communicating through their actions. And I really felt for them. I put myself in their position and really felt that I sort of owed it to them. At first, I felt it was difficult to see the pictures of them. And then I realized that somebody needed to tell their story. And I made them a promise, and I felt that once I did that, then I could deal with it because I was fulfilling a promise to them. They had, if you were, at the end of your life and you wanted to tell somebody what you were experiencing, wouldn't it be frustrating?
Oh, extremely.
And that's why I really feel a connection with these folks, some of them in particular. And in particular, this group of folks around the 105th floor, the North Tower. If you look carefully, they're taking their clothes off. There's some that have their shirts missing, some that have their pants missing. There's this one fellow who's in the process of taking his pants off. He's hanging by a finger and a toe, or a hand and a foot, taking his pants off outside the building.
Why would he do that?
If you think about it, if I were in that situation, if the building were on fire, I'd run to the bathroom before I lost water pressure and get my clothes wet, get extra wet clothing and wrap it around my head and head for the door.
Right.
I'd be wet. If the fire sprinklers came on, I'd be wet. If the fire sprinklers didn't come on, it was hot there, I'd be wet from sweating. Any which way you look at it, you're wet. Now, whatever's going on inside the building requires them to be outside the building. Obviously they want to live. They're hanging on. If it was smoke, and they, for some peculiar reason, need to take their pants off, you hold your breath, you step in, take the pants off, and step back out, or climb back out. But there wasn't smoke coming out the window there. So what's the deal? If it's heat, firefighters don't fight fires in the nude. They have a protective layer. Their, of course, protective layer is better than ours.
Absolutely.
It's just regular street clothes, but clothing protects you from a fire. The clothes get burned before the body gets burned.
Okay, but what are you saying? There's
something going on in there that's not fire that requires them to take their clothes off.
Well, I mean, why would they take their clothes off?
If they're wet clothes, if there's an energy field inside the building that affects wet clothing more than it affects dry clothing.
Almost like electrical charges?
Something. I can't tell exactly what, but that is the only thing that would make sense to me. For example, the active denial system used for crowd control, I'm not saying that's what was used, but that emits a microwave signal. And we all are familiar with the microwave oven, that if you put a wet paper towel in your oven, it cooks. If it's dry, it doesn't cook.
I see what you mean.
The water is more affected. And
so
they say with the active denial system that if you have wet clothing, it's many times worse.
So with the wet clothing on, they might have been cooking.
Yes.
Interesting.
And getting relief by taking the clothing off.
Now you just mentioned that, what if they want to try to communicate with us? In your book, Where Did the Towers Go? And you have some very shockingly sad pictures, but they look like, in some cases, people who are jumping, but not just jumping. They look like they're trying to make some kind of signal or something, don't they?
Well, there's one that looks like he's trying to fly. Like, how'd I get here? Like, he doesn't realize, how he wasn't expecting to be where he is.
Like he may have flipped out?
Like somehow he ended up outside the building without planning to be there. And there's one.
Well, they could have been in shock, right?
Right, but also I think of if something feels hot, doesn't mean it's physically hot, like with a thermometer, but something like what microwaves would do would create that same effect. That if your hand is on a hot burner on the stove, you don't sit there and think about if you're going to take it off or not. Your hand just flies off the burner.
It just flies off the burner.
And
that's that system we have inside of us that saves us.
Instinct. So if there's some sort of weird signal going on inside the building, they just fly from it. And then, whoa, how'd I get here? And
it'll make more sense to people when we get into this pretty soon. Now, What do you think the main question is that a number of people should be asking in relation to the destruction of the World Trade Center?
Where did the buildings go? There's a photo that's taken around noon on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Building 7 is still standing there. And you can see it in the background. The picture is from West Street down at the Liberty Street intersection.
Now, this is not the helicopter shot that you have on your cover, right?
No.
Okay.
This is one at ground level, and there's several of them, like the ambulance picture. There's an ambulance that was parked in front of Tower 1 on West Street.
Okay.
And Tower 1's not there anymore. But the ambulance is there. Tower 1 is gone down to the ground.
So the ambulance is still there.
And the ambulance is still there.
That's strange. That should have been obliterated too, don't you think?
Yeah, if you have this air, whooshing out, didn't it blow the ambulance away? Why isn't the ambulance crushed? There's a lot of questions like that. And if you have the book there, page 191, there's a picture. I also sent into...
Lex.
Yeah.
Lex has it. And he's got some clips that you sent him too.
That image, right, where it's an elevation map of what was left afterwards, and with a ghost image of what should be there.
Yeah, okay.
You just can't account for the missing material. But the most amazing part of it is those two little pimples where there's an arrow that points that people survived here.
Yeah.
And there was just blue sky above them. They weren't crushed.
And that's right under the tower.
Yeah, in the third floor. I've got some of the quotes of the folks who were in that zone in Stairwell B at the start of the chapter. They were just in amazement. They were calling for their buddies, help. And he said, we just kept telling them we're in Stairwell B. I remember everyone had the same exasperation I did. We must have told them 100 times. B stairwell, second floor, third floor. North tower, B stairwell, second, third, fourth floor, north tower, stairwell B, north tower. Where are you? North tower, stairwell B, second, third floor. You could hear they didn't understand where we were either. I'm going, my God, aren't you guys listening? And they said, where's North Tower?
Jeez.
From the outside, it looked like nothing was left. There's this little pimple there. And another one said, I looked and said, guys, there used to be 106 floors above us, and now I'm seeing sunshine. There's nothing above us. That big building doesn't exist.
The pile of rubble that fell from all those floors should have been 200 or 300 feet tall, shouldn't it?
Yes, not ground level.
No, you're right. And I never thought of that. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't at the time. They're so involved in this horrible tragedy that you don't think, where is all this stuff?
And the thing about people is when they have questions, they keep asking until they get an answer, whether or not it makes sense, and then they run with that answer. And on the next day, one day afterwards, there's a unique ABC video. I sent in an audio clip to...
this is the one with Jennings talking to
yes.
Stephanopoulos? Okay.
Yes. I don't know if you can play that or not.
Not on the air, but it's on our website.
Okay. It's where Peter Jennings, who's in the studio, asked George Stephanopoulos on the site, where's all the rubble? Where'd the rubble go? And Peter Jennings says, well, I've been asking folks that, and one of the workers said it all fell down to the ground, then was pulverized and evaporated.
That's also what a lot of people have been saying about the plane that supposedly hit the Pentagon. Where did it go?
It's just, get a small hole there and a lot of questions. Okay,
now let's go through some of the main phenomena that you found as you did your research.
Well, I'd say the biggest thing where I started was with the bathtub. The bathtub is this water retaining wall around the base of the towers. They were actually built in the Hudson River, and sort of a dike built around them to hold the river out.
All right.
The basement is about 30 feet below the water table. So if you have these 500,000-ton buildings, each 500,000 tons, crashing down on the bathtub, they damage it.
They should have smashed it.
Right. And flooded all of southern Manhattan and all of the subways and the path train tunnels. But they didn't. They couldn't have crashed down. Now,
The weight of alone would have crushed it, right?
Right, with the debris slamming down.
With that force.
Correct.
Almost like a tsunami of rubble, but it never happened.
Right. But 2 days later, they had the earth-moving equipment coming in to help clean up, and that equipment damaged the bathtub wall.
Huh. Why did they also come in and take some of the metal girders away so fast?
We're told that. We're told that that's what happened. We're told it was all shipped to China, or someplace like that. But you look and you say, did they ship it by noon on 9/11? Because the material is gone by then.
All right. Well, let's get into this now, Judy, and let's get into it in a big way. If you don't think the planes alone brought down the buildings, that there weren't bombs there or some controlled demolition, what the heck do you think would have caused the pulverizing of those buildings?
Well, I had gone through all the evidence first, and I think that's important to let the evidence lead the way. Someone who taught me well gave me this motto: empirical evidence is the truth that theory must mimic. So we must start with the evidence first, not the theory. And so many folks, for example, the smoke. If you call it smoke, then you think fire. It's already biasing your observation.
Sure.
But if you just keep letting the evidence speak, and as I say, let the evidence tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening until you do, because the evidence will always speak the truth. And once you keep listing all the different characteristics, strange characteristics, you start noticing a pattern to them. And after I had discovered all of these characteristics and listed them, I just happened upon this blog of someone, and wow, they had reproduced every single one of the same phenomenon I had seen. I thought that was mighty strange. That was the blog of John Hutchison.
I know John.
And it was amazing, the similarities. I'm not saying this is the Hutchison effect. What I'm saying is the same mechanism involved. You can do the same things. And what I call fuzzy blobs, he even has a name for it. Carl, he calls it. With his, so he's seen the same things. And the thing that scared me the most about I saw this ongoing effect, and someone who had written up something on John's work also stated that the more mass involved, the less it would be self-quenching, that it wouldn't stop, it would keep going. And I've seen evidence of that too. The ongoing, fuming for months and months and years. And just as of 1 month ago, I think it was, they finally got Bankers Trust down to ground level. They've been taking it apart all this time.
Yeah. The subtitle of your book is Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology.
If you look at the cover of this book, that's probably the most important thing that people should note from this. You look at it, and everyone who is aware of the event that day, which is essentially everyone on the planet, this was a demonstration of free energy technology. We know it works. It's not a theory. It's not guesswork. It's not speculation. The building's gone.
Well, when you talk about free energy technology, though, one would think of it in terms of a very uplifting, positive result. This was not. To me, then, if what you say is correct, this is a weapon.
It was weaponized. Tesla apparently wanted to share this, 100 years ago, but he was afraid it would be used for evil instead of good. Well, we don't have that risk anymore. It's already being used for evil, so there's no harm in using it for good. But the important thing is that we all make that choice. ignoring it is the worst thing.
Where would the device have to be located in order to do what it apparently did?
I'm not so concerned of where it's located. It's not just, one thing. It's not like a ray beam from space, which a lot of folks, label.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Is that possible?
Where it isn't so important as the interference effect. How John Hutchison creates the same effect is through interfering radio frequency signals within a static field. And it's where the interference takes place that's important. And
does it come at you like a force field?
It's where the things intersect. And how I came to that, well, my background is in interferometry. That's my area of expertise.
What the heck is that?
Interference of energy fields. I used optical interferometry to measure deformations in materials, but you get a different effect where things interfere. You get constructive and destructive interference. And there's a picture I also gave to put on your website with I call it the wax spot car, the wax job car. I named different pictures with different characteristics that were aha moments for me. And this is a police car that looks like the back end has a new wax job, brand new. The front is completely toast. What I mean by toast is it's history, not repairable, totaled. And there's a perfect line between the toasted part and the pristine part. Fire doesn't do that.
If what you say is correct, Judy, in that there was some kind of directed, weaponized technology here, regardless of bin Laden and the 19 hijackers, they didn't possess equipment like this.
I don't think so.
It's either got to be possessed by, a one world government, some shadow government, or one or two major countries, Russia, the United States, maybe China. That would be it.
It wouldn't really take that many people involved either. When folks would say, "Oh, it was an inside job," the beginning of my preface, I state, for the record, I do not believe that our government is responsible for executing these events.
Say that one more time for people who probably think you would say that. Say it again.
For the record, I do not believe that our government is responsible for executing the events of 9/11, nor do I believe that our government is not responsible for executing the events of 9/11. It's not a case of belief. This is a crime that should be solved by a forensic study of the evidence. Before you can determine who did it, it must first be determined what was done and how it was done.
And in terms of the what and the how, are you now absolutely sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that some kind of directed energy technology contributed to taking down those buildings?
Beyond a shadow of a doubt.
All right, you stay with us. We're going to be back with more with Dr. Judy Wood as we get into this and find out why she believes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this kind of technology could have done it, and then why. With our very special guest tonight, Dr. Judy Wood, we're talking about where did the towers go and her theory, her thoughts on the evidence of directed energy technology, and we'll be back with her and much more on Coast to Coast AM. And we're with Dr. Judy Wood. Judy, tell us some more about some of the strange evidence that you found. I think that's important.
Various first responders were running down the street when the towers were going poof, and it became total blackout because the dust was so fine and it went up, it blocked out 100% of the sunlight.
Mm-hmm. And
then they were relieved that the cars were going into spontaneous combustion because now they could see where they're going. And there was an emergency technician who had her coat catch on fire. She didn't describe in her socks. She didn't describe really being burnt or anything hitting her. But she was kind of like a human flashlight. Then she could see where she was going. And that seems pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
That, a lot of folks will say that, well, maybe the cars were towed that were burnt, but there's, you have eyewitnesses as to when they went up in flames. And there's a parking lot that is about 500, 600 feet from the North Tower that had spontaneous combustion. All the cars were just up in flames. You don't know. Well, it looks like flames. Who knows what it was? And there's evidence that this was not hot fire. Hot things glow, but not everything that glows is hot.
And I was going to say, was it unbearably hot at all down on the ground level?
Some of the first responders I've actually talked to said that it was the dust cloud was initially cooler than ambient temperature, which was a surprise.
And Judy, when you talk to some of the first responders and you're looking for evidence to come up with and see where the conclusions will take you, were they asking you why you're doing this? Were they offended in any way, or were they pretty willing to talk?
Some didn't want to be identified because of all of the hoopla around it. They would hint to me as to where to find, further information also. I've had, since my book has come out, I've had various first responders and people who were at the scene email me and just it's exactly what, they saw. I didn't have time to ask a couple in the past few days. I hope I'm not overstepping. There was someone who told me about leaving Tower 1 and walking past Tower 2 to the ferry terminal. And where they were, they looked back, and they wouldn't be able to see the tower from where they were because there's buildings in the way. But someone came up and said Tower 2 just collapsed. And they all thought that this guy was nuts because nobody felt anything, nobody heard anything. And the fires, they thought, were just about out when they passed the building. So things like that have really struck me as quite interesting.
Did any of the responders tell you that they were baffled, that things were strange down there?
Oh, very much. And, they felt like they were going nuts, the weirdness that goes on. And, again, people need answers to questions. And if they've not seen something before, they try to make it into something they have seen before and try to make sense out of something that is crazy. Like one fellow who left Tower 2 just before it went poof, dove under an emergency vehicle, the first responder, and thought that he was buried because everything went black. But then when the dust cloud cleared and sunlight came in, it was right above him, sunlight. No truck.
No.
He thought he was underneath the vehicle, and the vehicle was now gone.
Wasn't there some kind of a unit on the top of Tower 2 that was falling, and then it just simply disintegrated?
The top of Tower 2 kind of tipped over and stopped tipping and just turned into powder.
And, just poof, off it went.
It shrunk down at the level where they had the hole in the building, like around the 78th floor where the damage was. From there up, it tipped over, and then it kind of shrunk up and turned to powder before the rest of the building went away. And where it would have fallen, had it fallen down, it would have landed on Tower 4, or Building 4, which is a 9-story building. And that building disappeared. The main body of Building 4 is just
it was gone. Yeah.
And the north wing remains as though an X-Acto knife sliced it off. And you could look in on people's desks and see what was in there.
Have you seen any evidence like this anyplace else?
Yes. Tornadoes. They weren't as well, organized. But when I was a little kid, our family was driving west to go visit my grandmother, and we went through Topeka, Kansas, right the morning after that horrendous tornado went through.
Yeah, well, that's Tornado Alley.
And there was this apartment building, I'll never forget, it was sliced in two, and half of it was gone. And what was left, you could look in and see that somebody had their bed was still made, the white bedspread, and it had magazines on the bed, some books on the dresser, and some clothes hanging in the closet. I remember the bedspread looked just like my sister's. And the bed was still made. It wasn't mussed up. It wasn't like, a tornado went through their bedroom. It was just like the building was sliced off.
You've talked about a hurricane in the vicinity during 9/11. I've never heard of that before. Are you sure?
Very sure. How I came to find it, and I don't remember one either. I was looking at how the dust went up, and I thought I'd get a better picture because how far up did it go into the upper atmosphere? And I went looking for satellite images, weather satellite images, and wait a minute, what is that? It's a hurricane, Hurricane Aaron, the longest-lived hurricane of the season, the first big hurricane of the season, and it began forming in August of 2001. And it went to a Category 3, went just past Bermuda, and for 4 days it went in a straight line towards New York City. At 8 a.m., it stopped outside of town, like it pulled up to a chalk line.
And stopped?
Yep, made a U-turn, just about a 110-degree turn, and then went out of town that afternoon.
Hurricanes don't stop and turn, Judy.
It can, but there's this big high-pressure system that covered basically the whole country. The whole country was clear blue sky.
What is the significance of this?
Well, I started wondering, what do tornadoes do, or what do hurricanes do? That was a Freudian slip there. They have field effects. And you can kind of tell where the tornado or where a hurricane's going to go because the birds all leave town. Spiders pack up their webs. People who have arthritis often talk about feeling a storm coming.
Mm-hmm.
There's a different energy in the air that is sensed. And it is a distinct electrical energy that's outside of the outer bands of the hurricane as it's approaching. And what we measured around Manhattan on 9/11 at the three major airports, LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark airports, was thunder that day. So that right there is evidence that that indeed was within that reach. Well, let's look at what else happens with hurricanes and tornadoes. These torsional kind of weather systems. There's a picture in my book, also on my website, of a car sitting on a fence, a wooden fence, underneath the roof of a house. The car is not damaged. It's not scratched up. It didn't tumble there. It had to have levitated there and then come to a gentle rest, right balanced on this fence. And I think what a lot of people have seen before, cars sitting in trees or sitting on telephone poles in a similar way. And we assume that, a tornado sucks them up and drops them there, or a big wind, blows them there.
Sure.
Just like straw through trees. If people say that it's because the straw is flying fast. Well, it doesn't make the straw infinitely stronger than the tree. Why is the straw embedded in the tree? And there's also got a picture of a 2x4 through a palm tree, and another one of a plywood through a palm tree, big sheet of plywood. You start looking at the similarities of the effects seen on 9/11 with the similarities with the Hutchison effect, or that same type of physics. You can call it Tesla technology.
Tesla, yeah.
Whatever name. A lot of people have different names for it. There's great similarities. Well, how does John Hutchison create those same effects? He has a Tesla coil or a Van de Graaff generator to create a static field, and within that interferes a radio frequency signal. Well, we have a static field. If you look at the structure of a hurricane, it's like a giant supersized Tesla coil.
You submitted some kind of a request for corrections to the, what was it, the National Institute of Standards?
Yes, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They were mandated by Congress to determine, quote, why and how the World Trade Center towers collapsed. And that was actually in the title of their report. The final report on the collapse of the World Trade Center towers.
And I think the report, if I remember, was the burning of the beams, the metal, and the pancake effect, right?
Right, and they hired contractors to help them with the report, like underwriter's lab made a mock-up of the floors and set it on fire, and they cooked it for like twice the temperature for twice as long, and they still couldn't get it to fail to support load, so they had to call the test. They did 4 of those, and 4 out of 4 did not fail. They couldn't get them to fail with fire.
So why in the heck did they come up with that theory for the towers?
That's why I submitted also filed a QTAM case, a federal QTAM case, calling that science fraud. They signed off on reports saying fire did it when they proved the fire didn't do it. Or they couldn't prove the fire did it.
Do you think the report was a cover-up or just incompetence?
Directed, I think Congress had worded it and, directed them and put boundaries around it so that they couldn't come up with anything else but that. For example, Applied Research Associates, ARA, whose one of their main things is energy weapons, were the biggest contractors on the NIST report.
I know, but you missed my question. Cover-up or incompetence?
Oh, but they were directed in their contract. They were not to say what did it. They were instructed not to say what did it. So it's through instructions like that. Who's responsible for the instructions? If you limit the report and put boundaries around it, they.
Well, then it sounds like cover-up.
Yeah. It was meant as a sort of psychological operation in a sense. 10,000 pages that don't address the problem, but to lead people to think that it was studied.
Are you alone in this conclusion that some kind of directed energy did this?
I have a few supporters around me, but not a lot of people want to be vocal about this.
Well, they just, there's that small group of the 9/11 truth seekers, but other than that, most people just don't want to hear about it anymore. I mean, right now, the world's hoopla is over bin Laden's death and what's going to happen, whether there's going to be any retaliation. Give me, because if you can't, Judy, tell me right now, but I'd like your thoughts on how you think this came about and why. If you didn't study that part of it, then just tell me.
Well, what I can say is, a lot of folks will say that because NIST kind of covered it up, it's a government agency, directing its private contractors to cover it up, however they directed them to, doesn't that imply guilt? And my answer is no. That does not prove who did it. This is somebody's classified technology. Doesn't, define who, whether it's the U.S.'s or somebody else's, whether it's another country or just an entity somewhere else.
Or an entity might have it.
Yeah, there's some various scenarios that you can come up with as well. But if it is the U.S.'s top secret technology and somebody else got a hold of it and used it, they don't want people to know that.
All right, why concoct a plan where you hijack planes, you kill civilians, you take down a building? What's the reason?
Well, I'm not the person who planned it, so I can't, I do deal more with physical evidence about, what happens, and we do have evidence about what has happened since then. And like what is written, the foreword to this book written by Eric Larson, the first sentence of that foreword is, I think, quite appropriate. You read it. It says, "The book you hold in your hands is the most important book of the 21st century." Everything that has happened just about since then hinges on 9/11, hinges on an assumption of what happened on 9/11. And so much has taken place because of that. Here's a,
Well, the world isn't the same, and it never will be, I don't think.
Right. So whoever orchestrated this, you say, why did they orchestrate it? They didn't want the world to be the same.
Did you need the buildings to go down? Wasn't the horror of the planes, watching them smash into the buildings, wasn't that enough?
That if you make an assumption as to what the objective was, but if you look at what did take place, it's very, like Building 4 went away, it's gone. But across the street is Burger King, and they're still flipping burgers in there, and the power's still on.
Yeah,
That really bothers me. It just, how could it be so isolated, so exact? Like Building 7, the post office was right next door, right across the street, 3 lanes of traffic away, and the 47-story building didn't even spill across the street. Not a scratch.
And that post office building, I assume, still there functioning, right?
It didn't even get a scratch on it.
Yeah, that's strange. You would have thought that there would have been a lot of collateral damage there.
If you have a building collapsing down, like from controlled demolition, you have pieces that go flying at pretty big speeds, and you would have a lot of pockmarks all over.
Well, and that's controlled demolition.
Right.
If this was supposed to be a tragic, horrible situation, if it wasn't controlled, bricks, glass, this should have scattered everywhere.
Right. If it was bombs in the buildings, I'm saying if you had stuff shooting out, or if it was even just a gravity collapse. I went through the calculations of all of the air having to escape out of the building. At the rate in which the building went away, the air would be having to escape in excess of Mach 2.
So you are saying, don't let me put words in your mouth, that there's some entity, something, somebody, some group that has weaponized directed energy technology, and they have the capability of aiming it at structures, bridges, and taking these things down.
Yes.
That's kind of frightening.
And is another scenario for people say, well, of course the U.S. did it. And here's my,
I would say no.
Here's my counter to that, saying, let's say you're a group of 5 people, and you want to take over the U.S. Well, you walk in the front door, here we are. The U.S. military is going to get you. Not going to get very far.
That's right.
So let's say you have this technology, you poof the towers, and you get all of this mayhem going. You get this truth movement started that starts causing this distrust in the U.S. government, and they start, tearing up the country from within until the country wants anything but its own government.
Interesting. Let's talk more about that, Judy. We'll talk more about that when we come back, because now you're onto something. And our special guest tonight, Dr. Judy Wood, as we talk about her work, Where Did the Towers Go? We'll be back with Judy in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Back to what you were saying, Judy, and so whatever group has this device uses it to cause chaos from within, hires a bin Laden and his group of cronies to do what they do for the image, for the look, and then they start to eat and whittle away at a very powerful nation. Possible? Very
possible. That look what happened. I believe in looking at the evidence, and that's what the evidence shows.
Kind of frightening, isn't it?
But let's look at the good in this. And I'll read something from near the end of my book. It was inspired by a blogger named Stephen Warren, and I've added to that. We stand at the dawn of an entirely new age. By all evidence, man has in his hands a method of disrupting the molecular basis for matter and the ability, very possibly, to split the earth in half on a moment's notice. The technology demonstrated on 9/11 can indeed split the earth in half, or it can be used to allow all people to live fruitful, constructive, and non-polluting lives through their use of free energy. He who controls the energy controls the people. Control of energy, depending on what that energy is, can either destroy the planet or sustain the planet. But we have a choice, and that choice is real. We can live happily and fruitfully and productively, or we can destroy the planet and die. Every last one of us, along with every living being on this planet. The important thing is for us to realize we have a choice and to help others realize that choice is ours.
Can this technology cause earthquakes?
Yeah, but earthquakes are already there anyway. Did it cause these last ones most recently? I don't believe so. And it's, I'd have to see some pretty good evidence of it. But earthquakes are kind of normal, especially along that line. Japan was sort of due for an earthquake. Now, the question of having this power plant very near a fault line,
right.
That's something that we should really think carefully about. I think we could have this free energy technology instead. We wouldn't have things like the Fukushima thing going on.
I don't think we'll ever get to a point, Judy, though, where we get free energy because there's too much greed out there.
That's right. He controls the energy, controls the people, and wants to maintain control of that.
Now, take us through the use of the weapon from the moment they flip the switch. What happens?
Oh, I didn't design this. I can tell you
I
what
hope
it
not.
does. Right. Yeah, I wouldn't be talking about it if I had. But instead of talking about, the name of it or, the serial number of it or the Social Security number of the people who flipped the switch, I think what it can do is much more important.
But I mean, but what is it acting on? Particles in the atmosphere, vibration. What does it do?
It affects the molecular structure of matter. It's akin to also cold fusion. It's a kind of a derogatory name. Low energy nuclear reaction, I prefer to call it. It got a whole lot in common with that.
And to take down a building, you've got to really kick up the juice, right?
Not necessarily. That's another myth.
Really? How come?
If you have free energy technology, you don't need to worry about kicking up the juice, about plugging something into, the wall socket. If you think about a tornado, where does that energy come from? The tornado comes up sort of out of nowhere.
It's out of nowhere. It's out of the atmosphere.
It has unbelievable
it's all around
destructive properties.
It takes it.
Yeah, it creates something from nothing because it appears to create something from nothing. But
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I didn't ask you about HARP. Does that have anything to do with any of this?
There's a lot of terms that people like to use. They have HARP, Nazi Bell, scalar weapons, all sorts of different type of trendy terms for technology. And I think that assigning a name to a technology really pulls a veil of mystery over it. It ends up being like the boogeyman that everything gets blamed on, rather than understanding what it can do. And we all can understand what it can do. And I think that's the most important thing. The term that I would have for this gizmo would reflect what it can do and what it's made of, what it does. And the term I would call that is magnetic electrogravitic nuclear reaction.
Interesting. Now, why haven't we seen it turned against us in other regions of the country?
How do we know?
Well, we haven't seen stories of pulverized buildings.
Well, there was one in 1995.
What was that?
Oklahoma City.
Well, we also have Tim McVeigh and McNichols, or Nichols.
What I look at is the physical evidence, and I see cylindrical cutouts in the buildings, the same approximate diameter, and the toasted cars were also present there. Were cars, go into spontaneous combustion for apparently no reason. You have a fire break out on the side panel of a car. Gas tank doesn't explode. Just, strange things like that.
All right, but for 10 years, I'm saying, for 10 years since 9/11, we haven't had anything like this happen.
Or since then, you're saying, or?
Yes.
There's other suspicious events like the bridge in Minnesota. where you have every single support give way at the exact same moment.
Structural defect. They screwed up the bridge.
So you have like a dozen different supports that suddenly give way at the exact same moment, to the point that the vehicles on the bridge ride the bridge down and the people get out of their cars when it lands.
Well, if what you say is true, if what you say is accurate, then we're under attack. If they're systematically using this device in certain regions at a whim, aren't we?
Somewhat. It's new technology is being used by the wrong people.
What do they want?
I don't know what that end result is, but I see what it's doing. It's one thing I wonder about is that pretty soon become the norm? Seeing buildings turn to powder in midair. Oh, that's normal because we saw three others do it just like that. I don't know.
Let's take some calls. They're lining up here for you, Judy. Let's go to Wausau, Wisconsin. Ridge, you're up with us east of the Rockies. Hey, Ridge.
Hi. I got my thought on this whole thing is that there's a possibility that there's an energy system that they've already put in a number of buildings, and when the airplanes flew into them, caused an oscillation, and the energy systems that were already in the building went offline and caused this from the building up rather than it coming from someplace else and going to the building down.
Interesting. So you're saying it was already within?
Right.
What do you think of that, Judy?
I don't know if it would necessarily have to be within the building. And that would be, as for a lot of people have thought about having a self-destruct mechanism in a building, and my answer to that is, oops, boss, sorry, I leaned on the wrong button. Sorry about your building. There'd be mistakes made, and you'd be just, right the center of a target for any kind of terrorist to get to that switch, just flip the switch to make a building go.
At any time.
Right.
How big would this device have to be? I'm curious.
I don't know what size. It's the interference of the energy that does.
Like a bus, a van? What do you think?
It's whatever can create this energy signal. Again, look at John Hutchison's work. A Van de Graaff generator, or a Tesla coil, and a radio frequency signal. Now, what size gizmo do you need to create a radio frequency signal? Well, it depends on which ones you create and where and so forth. It's not so much the power of the unit as the way one affects the other. Let's look at how we get alternating current. You move an electrical conductor within a magnetic field and you get electricity. In a way, people could say that's getting something from nothing. It's the interaction of those things that creates the electricity.
Richard Hoagland sent your book to Jesse Ventura, who, used to be on the fence about 9/11. He isn't anymore. He thinks that they're either part of it, aware of it, or buffoons, as he would say. And, he's not so sure which of the three, but he's convinced it's one of the three. But Richard wanted him to see your book to kind of get him into this other state of mind.
Surely the awareness is there. That it was interesting when I first sent my book to my dad to read. He started out skeptical, and then he got to the point where, certainly Congress needs to know about this. You need to send this book to Congress. And then a little bit later, it was, surely they know about this already. And then he got to the stage where, we're in a heap of doo-doo.
Yeah. Well, Judy, let me ask you, because this basically cost you your job at Clemson. Was it worth it? Would you do it again?
Seeing that somebody needs to do this. Like what I told my mom, that, if I didn't do it, nobody would have a job. We wouldn't, someone needs to speak out about it. If not, if you put your head in the sand and pretend it'll go away, it isn't going to make it go away. It's going to make it happen more and more. The more people who are aware of it, the more they can help to kind of curb it.
See, you bring a new mix to this. I mean, I think similarly to you in that, bin Laden was involved. His cronies were involved. I saw the planes hit the buildings. The thing was a tragic day beyond anything one could imagine. But I've always believed that there was another group involved that brought bin Laden into the picture to do all the dirty work, and that their intent is to topple the United States. I never, ever thought George Bush was part of this at all. A lot of conspiracy theorists believe that. I don't. He may not have been the world's greatest president by any means, but this is one thing I don't think he would have done. How much did Dick Cheney know? How much did other members know and just turn their head? That's a big question.
You made the comment earlier about the book. It's something that, should have been given to the 9/11 Commission and so forth. I essentially have done that in filing the federal Ketam case, taking the contractors for the NIST report to court on it. It's basically taking the military-industrial complex to court. I can't prove who did it, but I can prove who helped cover it up. And these people knew otherwise. Like I listed what Underwriters Lab did. ARA, Applied Research Associates, their area of expertise is development and manufacture of energy weapons.
See, well, that's interesting. But my biggest concern, though, Judy, of all this has always been Building 7. That, to me, was the juggernaut, the piece of the puzzle that just didn't make sense. It didn't seem to fit. A building that collapses, a huge building that collapses, and is basically not touched at all. A few little fires in it. I mean, it was weird. It was bizarre.
And it, basically didn't touch the ground either. There was a few pieces left, but
it pulverized as well, didn't it?
It appears to have done that all afternoon. You saw fumes coming out of one face of the building until about an hour before its final demise, and then it was pouring out of another side of the building, but not any of the other faces. So you see, you'd think it'd be a traffic jam to get that, if it's smoke, get the smoke out. It would have to be pushing its way out, but it wasn't being pushed out. It was being pulled out, if you can see from the videos. There's an open windows on the north face. Stuff isn't coming out that face, but every square inch of the building looks like it's emanating, this dust. And it appears that there's a lot of mass coming out of the building for hours, all afternoon. And then you have nothing much slamming to the ground, signal-wise.
All right, let's go to Jeffrey in Davenport, Iowa, first-time caller. Hi, Jeffrey. Thanks for calling.
Hi, George. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I just agree. I feel, I watched the second plane hit the tower. I sat and watched it all day. We have all these conspiracy theories about what has really happened. Everybody has their opinion. But it's just hard for me to believe that people have all these different theories when they just think you should accept the fact that the planes hit the buildings. This is what happened. None of this energy or anything. The planes brought the buildings down. I've watched many different things on TV about how the planes and the metal was melted. I just find it really difficult to believe all these other things like the truthers and what I'm hearing today.
Well, I know that. I know how you feel, Jeff. And a lot of times we don't want to look at that, but there's no question the bizarre mix of all of this is Building 7 and why this went down the way it did. That alone, I think, makes everything suspect. It really does. In terms of this kind of technology, I'm pretty sure the governments or groups have been working on it for a long, long time. I'm not sure, Judy, that Tesla's technology was ever shelved. I think it was continued.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And there was a document that was released, I think it was in 1970 or 1960, from Tesla's keeping, that he had sent something to Congress offering if they would construct towers every 200 miles around the perimeter of the country, he would put a box on top of each one that would cause a vertical wall through which any plane or anything would pass would, quote, dematerialize.
Absolutely. He originally wanted to knock out enemy planes in mass. I mean, I'm not sure that a guy who had that kind of technology, we would stop looking at it. The FBI raided his home wherever he lived after he died, took all his papers.
Yeah, his safe. He was in New York. It was within hours it went into to somebody's keeping.
All his work gone. I mean, that's amazing.
It is, and thinking this is the guy who brought us alternating current.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Judy, stay with us. We're going to come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM with a final hour of phone calls as we talk about this incredible story and her work. Where did the towers go? I've got to ask you when we come back, Judy, where do you also get this book? It's a big one. We'll be right back. Okay, with our special guest, Dr. Judy Wood, we're talking about her work. Where did the towers go? A full hour of phone calls right around the corner on Coast to Coast AM. Judy, tell us about the rolled up carpet effect. What is that?
It's a term I gave for the columns that were curled around the wrong axis. We see, if in squashing pop cans, the sidewalls of the can buckle, they go in and out zigzaggy.
Mm-hmm.
When the towers went away, if they had collapsed, you would expect to see buckled over columns. They would fold over around the horizontal axis. But that is not what we see in the rubble of what's left. I call these outer columns the prefab sections of 3 columns wide by 3 stories tall, wheat checks, because they kind of look like that. And one of the photographers called them that. And it's a good name, just these units. So you see these wheat checks on the ground, and they're rolled up, looks like a rolled up carpet. These 3 columns are rolled around each other. The spandrel plates that were every floor are curled around. So if they're, had been crushed, you wouldn't get them curling around the vertical axis. They would be bending over.
I tell you, the picture on the back of your book is truly remarkable. And you can see exactly what you're talking about. The post office, there's the Verizon building. Both of them look simply unscathed, don't they?
The Verizon building had a hole in the front, just, one stab of a wheat checks went in there. But the post office, not even a scratch on its side. And also what I noticed that these, I call them stab wounds, or a wheat check stabbed into a building, that's only in a couple of places, and it's never above the 18th floor. These buildings are 110 stories tall, yet there's no wheat checks laying on the roofs of any buildings, which is peculiar. I also went through some calculations, rough calculations about how much of the top building, if it turned to dust and left, bottom 16 stories or so, that would create the same seismic signal as what was recorded.
Well, now answer this for me. If this high beam energy weapon was used, is it that accurate where they can literally pinpoint a building and not hit another one behind it?
If it's interference, it only happens where you have the interference of the energy fields. Doing a lot of work in optics and in photographic emulsion, think of the photographic emulsion on a piece of paper. The image you take of somebody doesn't burn their picture on the piece of paper. What it does is trigger a chemical reaction in that photographic emulsion, and it's controlled by the light. The photographic emulsion is uniform over the surface of the paper, but where the light hits it controls where the chemical reaction takes place. You develop it, and that's where on the negative, that's where the material stays, the silver stays behind, and the other part washes away, where it wasn't exposed. But think of it that way, that the static field is like the photographic emulsion, and the light is the equivalent to the radio frequency signal.
All right, let's go to the phones. Abraham is in Peoria, Illinois. Hi, Abraham.
Hey there. I just wanted to say thank you to you and to Dr. Wood. First of all, you, Mr. Noory, for having her on the air, because, and also thank you to Dr. Wood for the work she's done. And that's why I'm calling in, is because just browsing through all the information on her website and now in her book, it's just so important that people look into this for themselves, because she has hit the nail on the head, in my opinion. And it's just so amazing that she even took it to court, and at the level it reached in court, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in October of 2009. It's just really, really important information, because like you guys have been discussing, I really feel like the human race is so much better than this, and that this technology needs to be put to good use, saving people's lives and fixing the world and making it a better place, and not weaponized and used against innocent people that were just showing up to work on one day. And so thank you very much to both of you for bringing awareness to this important topic and all the evidence that shows what happened on that day. So thank you.
Well, Judy, you've done the lion's share of all this work. How long did it take you?
Well, I've been, you can say 30 years if you looked at my professional life, but
Sure.
Since 9/11. And figuring out it's also been a learning curve with how to not fall into the pitfalls of, the misdirections.
Where do you get your book? Amazon's got it?
Also on my website, wheredidthetowers.com.
I'm curious to see how mainstream media has reacted to you and this book. If anything, what have they done?
Well, you're the closest thing, and I congratulate you for having the courage to discuss this.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's important for people to hear other experts who have other views, so they can just sit back and make up their own minds about all these different things. And I just think we do not do justice if we don't look at these other views. I may not agree with you, Judy. I may agree with you. But the point is that people have an opportunity, and they should have the opportunity to hear you. And that's what I do. I wish the other media people would do that. They don't have to agree with you. And see, that's one of the mistakes. A lot of people think because we have a guest on, that means that's what we believe. No, we have a guest on because we want you to have the ability to hear another side or another angle. And I think that's so important. So important.
But also, a lot of people are in our culture now are conditioned to start with the answer and then look for the evidence that supports the answer. And they're in a hurry to get to the answer, and they take a multiple choice test. But if the answer isn't one of those choices, you're fixing to mess up. You're going to get a wrong answer. And it's unusual to find someone who starts with the evidence and moves forward from there and sees where the evidence takes them. So if the answer is started out with, and if the evidence doesn't fit the answer, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
See, the buildings, when they fell apart, to me, just looking at the picture on the cover, it doesn't look like a controlled demolition or a pancake effect. It looks more like a total pulverization. And it just seems like it's like a waterfall effect where it's just dust is just accumulating and piling over on each other.
My name for that picture is Bubbler, the Bubbler.
Yeah.
The Midwest, the drinking fountains are called bubblers.
It looks like it could be lava coming out of a volcano. You know it?
Yeah, it's just frothing up, and it's going upward and outward.
So the big cloud, not smoke, it's dust?
The majority of it, yes.
Yeah.
And it was so fine that it went up as well. It continued breaking down. That's another important issue is, These wheat checks, you can see them flying through the air and dissolving like ice cream, with the dust trailing out behind them, and they don't hit the ground.
And again, what do you mean? What do you mean by wheat checks? Just
the wheat
explain.
checks, the prefab units of the outer sides of the building.
Of the shell of the building. All right.
Yes,
where the windows are put in.
Right, the three columns, 3 stories tall, and there's these 3 spandrel belts across them. They're the prefab units they use to build the towers. And you see these things flying out and dust trailing behind them. And then the intersection where they're heading towards, right afterwards, is empty. Well, it's got dust and paper.
How would you feel if someone read your book and said, Judy, you're nuts? I mean, would that bother you?
I'm used to it.
Are you?
But no one can find anything they can't fault any aspect of the book.
Well, you've got 3 major degrees leading up to a PhD. You've got to know something about stress analysis and structural engineering.
Also, a lot of my work is in experimental mechanics, observing phenomena. And when these wheat checks flying through the air, turning into dust, then you notice that the dust has landed. You see a clear blue sky in the background, which means that had to be coarse dust that landed.
How did you get interested in the field? Because, most, mechanical engineers are guys. How did you get involved in this?
I always just made the decisions when I got to every fork in the road. That was what I liked to do. And figuring out how things work or why things are the way they are, and how materials act.
Did you have Legos and an erector set when you were a kid?
Yeah,
I knew it.
The toys that build engineers.
That's funny. Okay, let's go to Long Island, New York. Hey, Bill, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, folks. Some interesting things I'm hearing tonight.
Yes.
Question and observations. You mentioned the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going into that bathtub, under every building, in the bathtub, which is everything that fell, I think, are subway lines, the path lines to New Jersey, bringing in a tremendous amount of air to feed this whole system, all right? And each one of those buildings is connected in the bathtub with all this air. And I've never, ever heard anybody talk about what happened to the PATH trains that were in New Jersey, what happened to the subway trains that were uptown a bit. You understand what I'm saying? With the amount of heat, the amount of fire, and almost, to me, this creates like kilns, all right, that are being fed oxygen from the bottom. And nobody's ever talked about this and those effects. And to me, you talk about tornadoes. I grew up in the Midwest, so I know a little bit about tornadoes.
Oh, yeah, you know about tornadoes.
And, and tornadoes do crazy things. And my thought right now is what happened if there was enough air coming in to create a tornado in each one of these buildings in some way or another, all right? Plus the fact that, you had a couple 100,000 pounds of diesel fuel in each tower from the planes, and you mentioned Oklahoma City, and the Oklahoma City bomb, from what I understood, was like nitrogen fertilizer mixed with diesel fuel, all right? So all these things could have created all kinds of fumes and all kinds of, unknown situations. And then the next question I have, did anybody ever test the steel to see if it was up to standard? Because to me, cast iron pulverizing in heat would, pulverize where, regular steel may not.
All right. Go ahead, Judy. First of all, did anybody test the steel?
It was tested beforehand, and it was up to snuff. That Underwriters Lab had tested it in the late 60s, early 70s when they built the towers. But if the steel was too weak, or if it was too hot, you get bowing. I've got this pop quiz, and I actually gave it to my class once. We just had covered what the section on what temperature does to steel, and so I said, you want to heat up a pot of water over your campfire. So you get a bunch of old coat hangers, wad them up to make a grill, set your pot of water on top of that grill, and start the fire. What's going to happen? Is the pot going to just sit there, nothing will happen? Or as the fire heats up, what's going to happen with those thin metal coat hangers? Are they going to suddenly shatter into dust? And the pot slam to the ground? Or as they heat up, are they going to get less strong and less strong until they'll sag more and more, and the pot will just kind of ease on down to the ground?
Well, that's a good point. Next up, let's go to Jack in Ohio. Hi, Jack. Go ahead.
Yes, I guess I see things in a more broader view. I've always gone with the truth and physical facts, whatever the case, physical facts of any story or evidence, they simply don't lie. The physical facts, chemistry, mathematics, science, physics, all of which is possible and all of which the doctors already mentioned, they point the way. And however anybody comes down on it, whether they think it was an inside job or whether they think it was Al-Qaeda, these people were quoted as saying they wanted to make this country a shadow of what it once was. And so far they're succeeding. And you look at all that has been lost, all the wars, and now bin Laden so sudden and couldn't find him for 10 years, and the bodies in the ocean, re-elect me. And you can't Google what are Al-Qaeda's demands. You can't Google how large is Al-Qaeda. But it's been my contention that Al-Qaeda was never the big band that it was. It was a group of rebels, and they become mythical. And now that they've been decapitated, their leader's been lopped off, it's now going to be an excuse for more already a heightened sense of security and more.
Sure.
I always saw back in 95, I always thought that Oklahoma City, and I did think that bridge a few years ago was suspicious, but I remember thinking to myself that just seemed suspicious, but then plausible that there was homegrown terrorism, and it's plausible yet today. But like I said, they'll build the lie that a mythical Al-Qaeda is larger. But what I'm bringing this back full circle is I could clearly see after 9/11 that Oklahoma City was a run-up. But please, I hope all the listeners will consider that physical facts simply do not lie. Whether we, as the good doctor points out, that it is Tesla, cold fusion or that related energy, which is all possible. And it's just the physical facts. And, when an officer shows up on a crime scene, what does the facts say? And you go from there. It doesn't matter what the person in questioning is telling you. It's what the physical facts say. And the physical facts, the chemistry, the math, the science, it doesn't add up to what they have told us. No matter how you come down onto it, whether it was an inside job or a government plot or they knew or they didn't know, it doesn't add up. And it adds up to what the good doctor's saying and the Corps of Engineers, Justice for Truth, are saying.
All right, good observation, Jack. And we're going to be back with final phone calls in just a moment with our special guest tonight, Dr. Judy Wood. Her book, Where Did the Towers Go? I'm George Noory. I'll be back in a sec. I'll tell you what to expect on our next Coast to Coast show before we take your final calls. Well, on our next Coast to Coast program, split show, John Hogue joins us, Patrick Karen. We're going to be talking about world prophecy, so get ready for that. And when we come back with Dr. Judy Wood, we'll take final phone calls. I air on Coast to Coast AM. Judy, as you look back at all the work you've done into this, is there anything that you would do differently or change?
I can't think of anything offhand.
Okay, so you're pretty happy with it, and it's very elaborate. Where did you get all the photos? Where were you able to get them?
In the public domain. And some I took myself. Some I went to the site and visited it several different times with various people. Good friends Andrew Johnson and Russell Gerst, and we had taken pictures of it. But most of them are from the internet, and all of the pictures have their sources listed that are in the book.
If this happened the way you say it did, what do you think the message is behind this?
It's up to us as to how we want to perceive it. Do we want to see, this type of technology in the hands of where it's going, or do we want to do something different with it? And it's our choice.
Okay, back to the phones. Let's go to Ed in Placentia, California, west of the Rockies. Hey, Ed, thanks for calling.
Well, thank you. It's very admirable, the work that Doctor is doing. I myself got a master's degree in material science, and I also worked in fraction mechanics, and so I'm familiar with a lot of the things she's talking about, but I can't get over one thing. It's
what is it?
Material falling apart, and that is the atomic bond. And what I want to talk about the atomic bond is most people think when you heat something up that the atoms vibrate faster, but the main thing is the amplitude increases. What increases the frequency of the atomic vibrations? That's where we have an interaction of some type of energy, this free energy source you're talking about. It's the frequency of vibrational frequency between the atoms going. Would you have anything to say about that?
No, that's you're right on.
It's what you're basically saying, Judy, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And it's changing the structure of matter, and it can even cause transmutation. There's evidence of that from the WTC site as well as from John Hutchison's work.
Any idea how long you would have to bombard a building with this before it would collapse or pulverize?
I think it matters what type of energy for how long, and for the control mechanism. Like one of the towers was 1 hour, another tower was 5 hours, or more than that, six plus hours. So it's different amounts. It isn't just that it took it for as long as it could and then came apart. It's that there's different stages that can be used. I think you have slow-speed film and you have fast-speed film.
What did they do? Aim at one first and then move over to the next one, then the next one?
Or all of them at the same time. But just, a higher intensity of something at one instead of the other ones.
Well, see, what I don't understand is if you're using this kind of technology, this directed technology, how come you didn't knock down, let's say, the post office behind them in the same burst?
It's what happens with it. Okay, think of a photographic negative, this analogy, that light only goes through where the openings are.
Right.
It's sort of a template. If you have a kind of a template over this region, it can help control exactly where the interference is going to take place. There are other ways of controlling it, but that's a mental model of it. There's toasted cars as far away as FDR Drive, or underneath FDR Drive, like that one where it looks like the back end is, showroom pristine.
Yes.
The other side of it has this circular spot on it that's still kind of pristine looking, where it's toasted around it, an abrupt margin where 1 nanometer to the left is totally toast. 1 nanometer to the right is in pristine condition. Fire does not do that, but an interference of energy would.
All right, let's go to Catherine in Manhattan. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for holding.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
And Judy, thank you for the wonderful work. I can't wait to read your book. It sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
I wanted to throw this into the mix. In the mid to late 90s, I remember reading more than one article in, I don't know if it was in the Times or in a mainstream media. They were discussing that the World Trade Center buildings were not profitable. They were, built before the computers were, so common, and the way the elevators were split, they could not get the money that, similar, that they wanted to, and that retrofitting the buildings would have been, cost prohibitive. And they had, in the article, talked about, taking them down, but they said that could not be done because, the emotional attachment people had to those buildings and, everything. And, that always stuck in the back of my head, I think this is going to wind up being like the Kennedy assassination, where there was not just one motivation. People are so, geared towards, looking for one cause behind this, and, either blaming the government or, looking for one villain. We have to remember that in our government, there are a lot of people who are not loyal to the United States of America. We had a president who was a Rhodes Scholar. A lot of people don't know what that means, Rhodes Scholar. Cecil Rhodes set that up to propagate the goals of the British Empire, so that, a lot of people think Rhodes Scholar, the guy must be bright. I think of something totally different when I hear that. And then getting back to your field of the building mechanics, something had to happen, microwave or something, because that pile was hot enough. They were melting the workers' boots on them till the end of November. There were fires underneath that. Whatever was going on was so hot. It was, melting their boots well into the end of November. They finally declared the fires under the pile to be under control. So they're, we're not getting the right story. So, thank you for the work you're doing.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Let me mention something about the story with the boots. Again, people ask questions until they're given an answer. It doesn't matter if the answer makes sense. They just, so much going on. People just take that and move on. And that's one of them that stayed for quite a while, is about the boots melting. And I like to point out that, my oven, if it's melting on the outside, the turkey inside is well done. And there's these stories about the steel-toed boots melting, but no stories about feet being burned. And what I think is that the boots were deteriorating from something. And so the best thing that matched anyone's experience was that, I guess, they were melting from heat because they saw fumes coming up. But if you look at the actual temperature of things, you have paper that doesn't burn. You have water that doesn't turn into steam explosions. You had a broken water main that afternoon with firefighters walking around in knee-deep water. No steam explosions. And when water, becomes steam, it expands in volume by 1,600 times, and you'd have horrendous problems there. But you didn't have that. And there's no evidence of high heat. It was cold, wet, damp basement. But there is this appearance of it, like, things glowing, as well as fumes coming up, as well as other things continuing to disintegrate, continuing to break down. Like this dust I mentioned, that when it landed, it had to be coarse because you could see clear blue sky in the distance. And then pretty soon it starts rising up. Like, I call it fuzzballs around the feet. And then pretty soon it's rising up by itself. That fine of dust could not have landed in 15 minutes. In this photo I have, that had to be coarse dust that landed and continued breaking down to the point that it rose up and people were inhaling it. And the measurements, even weeks later, were that the dust particles were on the size of the order of DNA that size. Just very, there's no way a face mask could keep that from going. No way that anything could stop it. It would just go right into the bloodstream, inhaled.
Well, it's an incredible story. Now, is this the same as a particle beam weapon, what you're talking about?
No. This is interference of energy fields.
This is probably even more significant, isn't it?
Right, and it doesn't necessarily come from a place. It's an interference where it matters just where the interference is occurring, not where the beams start from, or where the energy fields originate from.
All right, let's go to Eureka, California. It's Heather's turn, first-time caller. Hi, Heather.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, and thank you, Dr. Woods, for your courage and the sacrifices you've made to bring this information out. Prior to hearing your very compelling arguments tonight, I've tended to believe that the evidence supported controlled demolition, and part of that was the presence of thermite in the walls in the World Trade Center buildings. And I'm wondering how that factors into your hypothesis. Do you think it was somehow important in the buildings coming down the way you suggest, or do you think perhaps these themes had several plans for ways to bring these buildings down, and controlled energy is simply the way they went with in the end? Or how do you explain thermite?
Well, thank you. Thanks for that question. There's a lot of talk of this thermite, but thermite is a welding material. It hasn't been shown to cause buildings to turn into powder in midair. But thermite is made of rust and powdered aluminum, and the buildings were made out of steel, which if you break it into fine dust, it's going to be rusty, and aluminum cladding. So when the buildings come apart, they're made out of, you would expect the dust from those buildings to be powdered aluminum and iron, and that's what we call thermite. So in a way, it's kind of a cover story to cover the idea that the buildings turned into powder. I mean, that's what this quote thermitic material is. But this does not cause a building to turn into powder in midair. And what we saw is a building that turns into powder. Okay, great. Let's go to Karen, Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Karen.
Hi. Okay, I've lived in New York City since 1993. I was here that day, and I was in Brooklyn, but in a different part of Brooklyn than I am now. And I was close enough that there was, the debris cloud, and there were pieces of charred paper floating through the air, and it was horrendous. But I mean, there's things I agree with. That cloud was not smoke. That big cloud, that monster, was just complete dust and particulate matter. Absolutely. But the thing that I'm a little confused about is in terms of saying that the building turned into powder, because a previous caller brought it up. Actually, it was like pools of molten steel burning. It was down there for 3 weeks, a month. I mean, and the smell permeated the entire city. Depending on which way the wind blew, it went everywhere. I mean, I can still smell it. I can recall it, and it was just this chemical, plastic, everything that was there, and it was burning down there. I mean, you'd cross the bridges, the East River bridges, Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan, and you could see right downtown, and you would see the fumes coming up.
Right, you would see
for weeks. But what I'm confused is that you say that it turned to powder and that there was no damage. I mean, the Marriott, which was directly across the street from the towers, had extensive damage, and there were other buildings that were right around from chunks falling. So, I mean, while I can agree that a lot of it was completely obliterated, there was still a lot that was left. And in addition to the molten stuff that was melting down there, for 2-3 weeks, there was a constant outflux of debris going out to Fresh Kills and on slow boats to China, but it was there. They just got rid of it really fast, which was just insane because it's a crime scene.
It's a crime scene.
I mean, I never, ever, for one iota of a second, believed the story, ever. I mean, it never made sense from the very beginning, and I don't know what it was, but it certainly wasn't the planes coming in and the damage that the planes did and the subsequent fires that brought these things down. And then Building 7, 47-story building that came down at 5:25 that day, Silverstein going on the air saying, I remember seeing it. I remember watching. Of course, we're watching TV all day long. I remember him coming on and saying, we decided to pull it.
Yeah.
And watching it, it was like...
And then denied it.
And then denied it. And then he said, no, we weren't talking about the building, pulling the building down. We were talking about pulling out the contingent of firemen because they determined that the fires were unfightable and, it was too dangerous for them. It wasn't worth it. So we decided to pull the firefighters, and the building just came down on its own. I mean, you look at that footage. You look at it. I mean, come on, people. Come on. Look at it. It's so obvious. And so I completely agree that there was something else. Something else brought those things down. Something else. But I have to say there was a ton of debris. There was a ton. Those buildings did not disappear.
Well, you can't pulverize everything, but you're right, Karen. It was everywhere. We've got a minute to go, Dr. Judy Wood. I'd like you to do a very quick wrap-up. Where did the towers go?
That is the question of the day and year and decade. They turned to powder or turned to dust, and the dust was first coarse and broke down finer and finer. And the book, Where Did the Towers Go, is available at where'dthetowersgo.com or on Amazon, either place. And in the book is evidence that needs to be explained, evidence that can't be explained by any of the typical stories that we've heard so far. But it's empirical evidence that must come first before we come up with theories. And what I present is not a theory. It isn't speculation. It's the evidence that needs to be explained.
No doubt about that. Judy, thank you for being on the program. Dr. Judy Wood, her book, Where Did the Towers Go? Pretty compelling, her theory on the evidence of directed energy technology. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Ross Mitchell, George Nappy, and pundit and Art Bell, I'm George Noory, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.